every now and then, a horror film comes along and completely changes the genre. We saw this in the past with films such as 1973's Exorcist, 74's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and 78's Halloween. Those films were iconic and changed the horror genre forever. So stay tuned and don't go away, because a new horror film has people asking, will this slasher be the beginning of a new horror icon? First up is a new slasher movie about a black serial killer the beginning of a new horror icon. You're about to find out. To this day, filmmaker Bill Paisley refuses to look in a mirror and utter the word Candyman 5 times. However, Paisley will write him a letter. And it seems bizarre, yes, I know, but it was the best way to summon legendary Candyman star Tony Todd's attention. Paisley wrote to Todd and requested that he consider a role in this new slasher movie and directorial debut in a film titled. In a recent interview, Paisley said, "We were looking for somebody to be our Vincent Price, this crypt keeper type, introing the movie. After discussing the matter with his team, they decided to send a query letter to Tony Todd, who likes to keep it old school and only accept queries by regular mail." While standing in a field in Arkansas, Paisley's phone rang, and an unforgettable voice on the other end said, "Hello, Mr. Paisley." When he heard Todd's voice, it sent chills down his spine, and he couldn't believe that he was actually talking to Tony Todd. As a child, Paisley grew up watching 90s horror movies that he probably wasn't supposed to be watching. Films like The People Under the Stairs, Tales from the Hood, Bones, and Candyman. He and his brothers called these movies hood horror. In all of the aforementioned films, the terror that befell the black neighborhoods was supernatural in nature. Since the 1990s, hood horror seemingly faded into obscurity, and Paisley wants to bring it back in a big way, with a movie that centers on the first black serial killer in a slasher movie. Next up, has there even been someone like Let's take a look. According to Bill Paisley, there's never been someone like Paisley explains, there was Candyman, there was Bones, but there was never a Jason or a Michael Myers or a Ghostface or a Jigsaw that took place in a black community or was a person of color. And his won the audience award at the SXSW Film Festival, and it stars actor Tunde Lalai in the titular role, a monster who hides behind a mask and slaughters his victims through cruel games. Lalai is quick to note, however, that there's more to the character than meets the eye. During an interview, he was asked about his character and explained, is about a kid who was picked on in high school. He got beat up by a group of kids as an initiation to a gang, and 20 years later, he comes back for vengeance. Characters like this, or who have gone through difficulties, are born when bad things are done to them. I don't take it for granted to be in this position, to set off the next generation of Candyman. It's incredible. Paisley and Lalai's drops at the theater near you on October 14th, and be prepared to be scared. Up next, what are the top 10 scariest films ever made according to Rotten Tomatoes? Let's find out. Coming in at number 10 is a horror film that scares the bejesus out of me, 2017's It. The fear of clowns is actually a thing, and if you needed any further proof, take a look at 2017's It, based on Stephen King's novel of the same name. 2017's It went on to beat The Exorcist's 44-year record as the highest-grossing horror film ever made. Director Andy Muschietti's big-budget adaptation is a nostalgic retelling of a story about children scarred by trauma. Actor Bill Skarsgård's portrayal of Pennywise, an evil shape-shifting clown, was bizarre, unsettling, and extremely scary. In other words, Skarsgård's performance as Pennywise was everything it should be. The film is chock full of jump scares, impressive set pieces, and some first-rate CGI. The result is that 2017's It is a horror film that's both fun and full of terror at the same time. Accomplishing that is no easy task, and speaks to Muschietti's prowess as a filmmaker. Coming in at number 9 is 2010's Insidious. The supernatural thriller is about a young boy who falls into a coma and starts to channel an evil spirit. The story and concept themselves may not have been groundbreaking, however, the mythology was compelling enough that it spawned 3 additional sequels. Australian director James Wan has said that Insidious was meant to be something different than gratuitous violence of films like Saw, and he wanted to craft something on a more spiritual level. The end result is an effective horror film that is frequently regarded as one of the best jump scare movies ever put on screen. Stay tuned and don't go away as we continue to reveal the top 10 horror movies of all time. Next up, can a home really be sinister? You're about to find out. Coming in at number 8 is 2012's Sinister. Despite not being ranked as the number 1 scariest film ever made according to Rotten Tomatoes, some theorize that Sinister is the scariest film ever made. Director Scott Derrickson's film Sinister is a simple house/possession story about a true crime writer who moves his family into a house where a family was murdered. Once there, he discovers that the home has an evil tenant, and for many who saw it, the dramatic reveals and creepy set pieces outweigh any recycled genre tropes. And there's a report that that claims Sinister is the scariest movie ever made. Sitting in 7th place is 1978's Halloween. The film made Jamie Lee Curtis America's Scream Queen, and John Carpenter became a force to be reckoned with in the horror genre. Halloween kicked off the slasher genre, and although it's devoid of realistic gore we've come to expect of films in 2022, it does offer plenty of scary thrills and chills, and there's a reason the franchise is still going strong after more than 40 years. Michael Myers, aka The Shape, a man in a white mask, has given millions of people around the world nightmares. Up next, do the Japanese make some of the scariest horror films in the world? You bet. Coming in at number 6 is 2002's The Ring. Director Gore Verbinski was tasked with remaking Japanese director Hideo Nakata's horror film about a cursed videotape, but Verbinski chose to keep the original film's striking visual imagery, the girl in a white dress with straight black hair covering her face. Who would have thought that something so simple could send shockwaves of terror through audiences around the world? Well, it did. The film starred Naomi Watts and opened America's door to East Asian horror. In 5th place is 1974's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Director Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is loosely inspired by the crimes of Wisconsin serial killer Ed Gein. The massive, frightening presence of actor Gunnar Hansen's Leatherface essentially paved the way for other killers, such as Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. The film also inspired the use of power tools as weapon in future horror films. Coming in at number 4, one of my all-time personal favorites, 1980's The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson. Legendary filmmaker Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's novel The Shining is a masterclass in set and production design. The film features a collection of memorable images and iconic performances by Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. The film's few jump scares are chilling, but its true horror comes from the way you experience Jack Torrance's descent into madness. Despite not clinching the number 1 spot, The Shining is widely considered to be the greatest horror film of all time. Finally, can you handle the top 3 scariest horror films of all time? You might want to keep the lights on and lock your windows and doors for these ones. Coming in at number 3 is 2013's The Conjuring. Aussie film director James Wan is the man behind such films as Saw, Dead Silence, Insidious, and The Conjuring, which was inspired by the real-life experiences of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens are best known for their work on the strange case that inspired the Amityville horror movies. Wan and his team found fresh terror in familiar genre tropes. And if you haven't seen it already and you're in the mood for scares, check out The Conjuring. Moving on now to 2nd place. In 2018's Hereditary, writer-director Ari Aster made a huge splash with this feature film directorial debut. Hereditary is an amalgamation of dark family dramas paired with supernatural horror. Hereditary struck a nerve and horrified moviegoers, and overnight, Aster became the talk of the horror genre. Moving on now to the scariest horror film of all time, and in 1st place, it's 1973's The Exorcist. The film tells the story of a possessed demon child and the attempts by a priest to exorcise the young girl. It's the highest-grossing R-rated horror film ever made, and the first to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. The film is also credited with inspiring mass hysteria across America, spawning protests and widespread vomiting and fainting in movie theaters. And that's a wrap for today. Thanks for watching.